It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I am Geoff Harbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. And hey, we're back at it here with the next Cybermen story for our little Second Doctor Cyberpalooza that I set up for this month. This time around, it's a pretty highly appreciated and kind of important serial in all of the classic Doctor Who era. This week, I'm going to talk about the goings-on in the Tomb of the Cybermen. So let's do a little bit of catch-up here before I talk about this serial in particular. Last week, we talked about the 4th season serial, The Moon Base. That featured the second Doctor, Patrick Troughton, still somewhat early in his run, as that was only his 4th serial that he had starred in at the time, teamed up with his new but eventual long-running companion, Jamie McCrimmon, and his holdover companions from his first incarnation, Ben and Polly. And it was sort of a direct sequel to the 10th Planet that introduced the Cybermen and featured the first ever regeneration sequence that saw the first Doctor, William Hartnell, give way to Troughton's incarnation. But now we've moved to the 5th season with this season premiere, basically, in the serial that kicked off the 5th season. And there has been a little bit of a shakeup in the TARDIS in between the last one that we talked about and this one. So a little over a month after the conclusion of the Moon Base, the 6-part serial, The Faceless Ones, began. By the end of that story, Ben and Polly realized that the events that they took part in with the second Doctor just so happened to be the exact day that they left with the first Doctor in the 3rd season finale serial, The War Machines. So they decided to depart and go home, considering the Doctor is pretty rubbish at piloting his own time machine. Jamie and the Doctor would go on after the Faceless Ones to face down the evil of the Daleks in a 7-part story that mostly took place in Victorian England, where the Daleks were coercing a couple of inventors to set a trap for the Doctor so that they could steal his TARDIS. Now, by the end of that serial, the Doctor and Jamie were joined by the daughter of one of those inventors, Victoria, as a part of a promise that the Doctor made that the girl would be taken care of when one of the inventors, her father, is killed by the Daleks. Now, Victoria would join the TARDIS for 7 serials as a whole, and that's if you include her original appearance at the end of the 4th season. What made her dynamic particularly kind of interesting with this crew is that here she was, a Victorian-era lady of good breeding and standing and all that stuff that you probably would have heard back then, and she was matched with the Cosmic Hobo and this kind of impulsive, emotional, and reckless Scottish national from 100 years before her time. However, Jamie was particularly fond of Victoria. He was utterly crushed when she leaves the TARDIS to stay in the 20th century with a new family. These are two people that shouldn't like each other as much as they do. Well, at least from Jamie's perspective, as he was the one who was extremely protective of Victoria. But anyway, enough about all that. I just wanted to kind of set the stage because the Tomb of the Cybermen now features the second Doctor with Jamie and Victoria in tow. And as for the serial itself, the Tomb of the Cybermen is considered one of the very best. After the first part aired, Sidney Newman, Doctor Who's creator, phoned the new show producer, Peter Bryant, to congratulate him on a smashing start to the new season. And it has, ever since, kind of retained its favorable standing. That said, there are some stereotypes that don't play as well some 55 years on, but the story itself is what usually keeps its high regard. Now, what's kind of funny is that really on its face, if you watch enough classic Doctor Who, I would struggle to say that it is particularly special, other than for the longest time it was one of the earliest stories and one of the very few stories from the second Doctor that we actually could see later on, like in the 80s and 90s. But generally speaking, it's Cybermen doing Cybermen things. Really, there's some good character moments that I'm going to bring up here in a little bit, but I think a lot of its prestige comes from the fact that for the longest time, it was one of the earliest full serials that you could very easily see and get a hold of on VHS or through your local television station that carried Doctor Who. But I will also say that there is an element to this serial that I will talk about here later that does have something that kind of carries throughout a lot of stories later on down the line with how characters interact with one another. That's really kind of interesting. But we actually almost didn't have this serial to enjoy all these decades later. Again, the early stories of Doctor Who is a bit of a wasteland of what still exists, what might be found elsewhere in the world, and so much more. The nasty habit of the BBC of erasing their tapes to save cost is a terrible thing in retrospect. May have made sense at the time, but not so great after the fact. And it was often thought that this serial, above many others, was one of the most unfortunate losses in that practice. And in the 70s, it was found to be lost and listed among the missing episodes. A novelization from Target Books titled Doctor Who and the Tomb of the Cybermen, written by Jerry Davis, was particularly popular in the 80s. It has a cover that is kind of seared into my memory, and just about every bookstore that carried the Target novelizations of the Doctor Who serials had a copy because it was just thought to be a super important story. The plan by the 90s was to create a recording that would kind of be basically made by fans at the time who made audio recordings from their TV when the serial originally aired, and then have some fill-in stuff to kind of help with the gaps, voiced over by the Third Doctor's actor, John Pertwee. But it was actually discovered in late 1991 that a Hong Kong company had tele-recordings of all 4 parts and handed it over to the BBC. And just some months later, in like May of 92, the serial was released to VHS and is the only classic era Doctor Who story that topped the UK sales charts for home video. This serial is still the earliest serial of Troughton's to exist in its video and audio entirety, despite all the audio and several episodes from his first season, the 4th season, still existing. Until 2013, when Nigeria returned the complete story of The Enemy of the World, The Tomb of the Cybermen was the only serial that was complete that actually featured Victoria. She was almost kind of a lost companion of sorts, because she never appeared in any other, anniversary specials or anything like that. But with the recovery of The Tomb of the Cybermen, the BBC went hog wild to cash in on the excitement and appreciation surrounding it there. A CD soundtrack was released. In 2018, a vinyl version of that soundtrack was pressed for Record Store Day, and it was the very first black and white serial that was transferred and released on DVD. It was later released as a single story with no episode breaks, and there would be ways that you could get that. Like when I watched it on PBS, they were usually full, what they would call feature cuts that didn't have the episode cuts in between. But they took a version of this serial, did one of those feature edits where it was just one continuous story, and presented it in widescreen with a remastering. So yeah, I guess you could say that this serial is kind of a big deal. And I think a big part of this is that this is maybe the most accessible, being that it is only 4 parts in length, in terms of a Second Doctor story that people can readily see. I remember when I was a kid, there were there was one of his stories, The War Games, his final serial, the Second Doctor's final serial, and that's a 10-parter. That's going to be difficult for people to watch, but we were able to see it here in the Indianapolis area thanks to our PBS station. But Tomb of the Cybermen being only 4 parts is easy for people to kind of sit down and watch. So it's kind of the quintessential Patrick Troughton Doctor Who serial. So let's get into it and talk about the story that everyone goes bonkers over. So we start with the Doctor and Jamie showing the inside of the TARDIS off to Victoria, and she is a little dubious about the flying, time travel, etc. And the Doctor is eventually asked, since he time travels so much, how old is he? And he responds that he is about 450 years old in Earth years. That's one of the earlier instances in which the Doctor reveals a particular age, at least in a popular serial. Now, while Jamie goes to get Victoria some more suitable clothes to wear for their adventures, we then shift to the planet Telos, where an expedition is looking for the entrance to a city or a citadel of some sort. Some of the expeditions seem pretty spooked by the planet in general, and they don't really want to stick around for very much longer. But the expedition is specifically looking for the remains of the Cybermen, as they explain their presence here to the Doctor after the TARDIS arrives. However, the Cybermen, despite being more than happy to decorate its walls by the doors of their tomb with their likeness, maybe don't really want to be found. They booby-trap the door to electrocute anyone who touches them. The Doctor is not pleased these people are trying to find the Cybermen, but he'll stick around to help them open the doors to figure out what's inside. And, being the Doctor, he's there to kind of help out however he can, but especially if the Cybermen wake up. But they get inside and teams break off to look at various machines and whatnot. The Doctor has a pretty important question. Why do the Cybermen need a place like this? Why did they build it? But the other archaeologists think that he has an astonishing lack of curiosity because he's purporting himself or telling people that he is an archaeologist himself. And archaeologists like to dig up old things, and he doesn't seem too happy about digging up these old things. But suddenly, the place's machinery comes to life. This worries the Doctor quite a bit because the Cybermen are clearly not as dormant as the expedition thinks they are. Now, while there are no Cybermen lurking about to give the expedition troubles yet, a member of the expedition is killed after he and Jamie mess about in a room that basically acts as a testing range for weapons. Also found is a small silverfish-like robotic creature that doesn't seem to be as unmoving as it originally looked when they found it on the floor. Now, after it's discovered, the ship that brought the expedition is either been broken into or disabled somehow or possibly sabotaged. The team is more or less kind of trapped here in this tomb-like building. They can't go back to the ship because there's no room for everyone while things get repaired over the next few days. And on top of that, the ship's captain doesn't want to bring anyone back until he figures out who or what trashed the ship. Now, one of the archaeologists opens a hatch that leads downward into a cavernous tomb. And in this tomb, a giant wall that is multi-leveled basically has an army of Cybermen slumbering behind it. They kind of describe it like a honeycomb, but it's really just like these holes in a wall that have these kind of cellophane covers instead of doors. Now, a traitor in the expedition, Captain, shuts the hatch down to the sublevel. One of the other saboteurs, Klieg, activates a device that defrosts the lower level and awakens the Cybermen. The Cybermen begin to move behind the thin film that entombs them, and they eventually break through and begin to pour out in one of the earliest iconic moments of the Doctor Who series. Now, the plan of the main bad guys, Klieg and Captain, are that they are a part of a cult-like group called the Brotherhood of Logicians. They are incredibly intelligent. They're into logic, obviously, that's in their name. But they have no real power. They operate under the impression that if they revive the Cybermen will be grateful to the pair and give the Brotherhood the power they need to take over the world. Now, in the main control room, while the Cybermen come to life below, Captain has Victoria hostage until the small bug-like robot, that's called a Cybermat, attacks Captain and basically bites her and renders her unconscious. When the Cybermen revive their cyber controller, Klieg tells them that he needs their strength and they need the Brotherhood's intelligence. Now, the cyber controller disagrees and tells him that he and the others in the tomb belongs to them. So basically, they intend to convert the captives into a new breed of Cybermen. Now, the cyber controller reveals this tomb is a bit of a trap. Those with superior intelligence will work out the puzzling controls to open the tomb and revive them. Then they will rebuild their invasion force to make another run for Earth. And the cyber controller approaches the Doctor and tells him that they recognize him. He destroyed Mondas. He repelled their attack on the moon base. So again, nice continuity in play here. The Cybermen begin to herd the prisoners to basically begin kind of putting them into whatever it's going to take to convert them into Cybermen. However, Victoria has gotten help from the ship captain to get the hatch open, and he goes to find out what's going on with the rest of the expedition, and he uses some smoke grenades to rescue the captives, but not everyone escapes. A strongman part of the group who has been mostly working for Captain and Klieg, Toberman, is captured and eventually partially converted into a Cyberman. Now, once they are able to get the Cybermen trapped again in the underground part of the tombs, the Doctor and Victoria have a really nice chat. To her, of course, her father has just died at the hands of the Daleks. Now, to us as the viewers, it's been months since that story took place, but she currently only has these sad thoughts about her father dying. But the Doctor gives her some interesting advice about how these memories won't all be so sad. They will turn happy, and she will also carry on with her life. And when she wants to remember her father, she will. But most of the time, he's just going to be still in her mind, but just sleeping. It's a really nice moment and shows how much of shows a much more serious side of the Second Doctor's persona than we typically think of. Now, after defeating a bunch of Cybermen by frying their little computer brains, Klieg and Captain return with a repaired Cyberman gun, which he plans to use to kill the Doctor. But another member of the expedition jumps in front and takes the shot in his arm. And Captain says they will all make great specimens for the Cybermen. The Doctor is still astonished that Klieg thinks that he can bargain with the Cybermen. Klieg says that he'll let the Cybermen revitalize as long as they agree to help him conquer the Earth. The cyber controller accepts, but when the Doctor takes the controller to the revitalization chamber, the Doctor shuts the door and asks Jamie to tie ropes around it to trap the controller inside, but the controller busts out anyway. When the controller kills Captain, the partially converted Toberman breaks free from his Cyberman conditioning and attacks the controller and kills it. The Doctor and Toberman go into the tomb to put the Cybermen back into their frozen state, but Klieg follows to stop the Doctor, but the Doctor distracts Klieg by appealing to this guy's hubris, and we'll talk more about him here in just a moment. Cyberman kills him, and while the Doctor and Jamie refreeze the Cybermen inside their tomb, Toberman kills the Cyberman. As the Doctor resets all the booby traps, the controller reawakens and attacks, but the Doctor and Jamie go outside to close the electrified door, and when they struggle to do so, Toberman has to finish the job. Now, Toberman dies, but the cyber controller is also destroyed. So let's get to the three things I like about the Tomb of the Cybermen. First up, there is some really nice comedy in these early bits of this episode. It feels more human, I suppose. There's banter between the Doctor and Jamie about a smooth takeoff in the TARDIS so that they don't scare off Victoria, to which the Doctor doesn't really take too kindly to. He gets a little frustrated with his young companion. Next, when the TARDIS crew go to the tomb with the expedition, the Doctor prevents the doors from electrocuting anyone. So Jamie, trying to act all studly, steps up to say that he won't have any problems opening the door. It's just a door. Well, he struggles, and he's forced to say that he's not been working out lately. Then, when Toberman, the strongman, steps up, the Second Doctor has a comment about whether or not he really wants to try the door, to which he has to sheepishly get out of the way and say, yeah, Toberman is more than willing to try. And when Victoria is too scared to enter the tomb, the Doctor tells her that she looks nice in her new dress that was picked out for her to get out of her Victorian clothes. And when she comments on the length of the dress, he points out that the kilt-clad Jamie has the same length, and he doesn't seem to have any issues. It's good banter to bring us into this new season. It's also less sterile than earlier episodes. Like, while the Doctor, Polly, and Ben always had good banter at times, Polly was a little bit more like the secretary. He treated her at least like the secretary. Although the last time we talked about these people, Polly was the one who figured out that acetone could really hurt the Cybermen. And, then you always had like the hero type of character, and that's a leftover from the William Hartnell era. William Hartnell couldn't do the action scenes, so they always had like a hero character, but that doesn't necessarily make any kind of relationship feel normal. So, these people really do seem to like each other and have relationships with each other beyond just kind of being in the same box flying through time and space. It's a really nice thing that really maybe didn't exist too much before this episode and before this serial started. Now next, this story serves as the first appearance of a couple of things that will come back a few more times throughout the Doctor Who history. And the first are the Cybermats, and they're these kind of silverfish-like creatures that kind of act as little weapons and reconnaissance tools. They're almost cute little, they're just cute little things, right? They have these segmented bodies and flip around like worms, and they have these little skirts around the bottom of their bodies, probably to hide the wheels used to kind of move them around the sets with radio control. But they also have these big bug eyes. I like the Cybermats. They're kind of cute. However, the big inclusion here is the leader of the Cybermen. Before, they were always depicted as nameless, identical creatures. Now, there's an actual leader that seems to dole out orders and commands for the rest of the Cybermen to follow. They may be something of a collective, but they still have to receive their orders from someplace. So his design in this is also pretty neat. The other Cybermen have entirely silver helmets that they have the little bars that look like handles that come out of the sides of their heads and go up to the top of the helmet. However, the controller's helmet has a frosted and kind of translucent part that almost looks like a brain is on the inside. And it's taken to fairly terrifying extent in the modern era, where the cyber controller definitely has a brain sticking out of the top of his helmet. But this does end up creating something of a hierarchy in the cyber culture, I guess. But later on, we'll see Cybermen with black earpieces and handles that might be called something like cyber leaders or something like that. I look at them as kind of like leaders of a squadron, but the cyber controller is the main guy. He's the Cyberman in terms of, he hands out he's the main Cyberman who hands out all the orders to the Cybermen and the cyber leaders. This is the first time that we really see the Cybermen backstory kind of expand and show more of their structure as a race of creatures. They're not just robots that are being controlled by some mad scientist. They actually have a structure themselves. And lastly, this is kind of silly, but I love these types of characters like Klieg. He's so full of himself. He's so dead set on his mental superiority being all that matters to make him someone to be taken seriously and listened to, that he cannot get it through his thick, dumb head that the Cybermen cannot be reasoned with or negotiated with. Sure, Maybe they have the same goals of conquering the Earth or whatever, but they have completely different ideas about how to go through with this plan. Klieg is so mustache twirling and so single-minded and so unable to see how utterly dumb his ideas are that you just love to hate this type of villain. It's not that often that you have a guy look the Doctor straight in the eye and belittle the Doctor's intelligence. Not even the Master would do that to his fellow Time Lord. That takes a really special piece of garbage villain, and I love it. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon at filmseizure.com. But don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Mastodon. You can find our new Mastodon account up in on the website. If you go to filmseizure.com, there's a little place where you can follow us, or you can look in the description of this episode as well, and you can find the link to us there. And you can subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast each Wednesday morning and Monster Mondays episode each Monday afternoon at your favorite podcast providers. And we also upload the podcast audio bits to YouTube too. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new reviews every Friday morning. Next time, we travel to another futuristic setting where the Doctor and Jamie not only deal with a Cyberman invasion, but meet a new friend in Zoe Harriet in the Season 5 finale serial, The Wheel in Space. Until next week, stay spooky.